You get used to people being wrong in this line of work. Analysts, politicians, desk officers in clean buildings a continent away, they miss details, they guess, they brief you like it's gospel. But this one was something else. This one was a little masterpiece of fantasy strapped to my back and called a mission. I was still running hard in the 80s, older than most of the boys on the teams, but still moving, still volunteering, still working the fence where nobody really knew who owned which side. Somewhere out on the edge, dry country, bad roads, a government lying to itself just to keep foreign money flowing. I'd been there a bit already, working with SF types, some agency hands, some local guerrillas, the kind of indigenous fighters everybody writes about, like they're pawns when they're usually tougher than the guys writing the reports. They slid the folder across the table like it was a neat package. High-value target, rural compound, lightly guarded, guard roster in neat rows, antenna locations marked with little symbols, timings, overhead photos, personality sketch like they knew the man's favorite breakfast and how long he took to piss in the morning. I flipped through it and my first thought was simple. Too clean. Way too clean. Real life doesn't line up like that. Somebody's always late. Somebody got drunk the night before. Somebody changed the guard schedule and never told anybody. Real war is crooked, messy, no straight lines. So when I see straight lines front to back, I don't think good work. I think somebody's selling a story and hopes I'm dumb enough to buy it. But I'd volunteered for it. I always did. Volunteer for everything they come up. Don't turn anything down. That's my rule. You say yes, because what you may turn down sounds insignificant, may turn out to be the best thing going, may be a cover story for something really good. You don't walk away from work just because the brief smells funny. You note it, you adjust, then you move. We were going in at night. That was non-negotiable for me. You move after they've eaten, after they've talked themselves to sleep, after pride and liquor and boredom do half the work for you. The enemy doesn't like to work at night, which gives you the upper hand. You get about a 5-hour block where you can move almost freely if you know what you're doing. That's my world, always has been. The plan on paper was simple. Approach from the south. According to them, no dogs there. 2 outer guards, both lazy. 1 tower man, rotating. Primary target, sleeping in the north wing of the main building. Secondary structure with a little communications gear. Grab the target alive, grab whatever looks like notes, tapes, photographs, and leave the same way we came. All nice arrows and tidy boxes. You want to know how to spot a lie in an operational brief? It's not the fancy acronyms. It's not the maps. It's the confidence. When they're too confident about things they can't possibly know, you start planning for everything to go straight to hell at once. That's exactly what happened. We started our movement late in the evening after the local call to prayer rolled through the town and died off. After that, people eat, talk, drag kids inside, street noise sinks. That window, early night, maybe around 9:10, that's where I like to live. The soft hour for them, hard hour for me. I had 2 local guerrillas with me. Not animals, fighters. One had a white scar, cutting his eyebrow in half. The other had that quiet stare you only see in men who've buried too many people and don't bother bragging. They both had more to lose than me. That matters. You want people who bleed if it goes wrong, not tourists hunting souvenirs. Back at the safe house, the handler walked me through the intelligence 3 times like repetition would make it true. Compound on a low rise overlooking a dry wadi. Outer wall about 8 feet, mud brick, patched. 1 main gate, 1 side gate, no vehicles inside, all parked outside, 4 family units living inside. Our guy is a cousin using the family for cover. That word cousin gets used like a bandage out there. Covers a lot of wounds. They told me dogs were chained near the front gate only. They told me the antennas on the roof were for simple local radio chatter. They told me guards rotated on a nice schedule, 2 hours on, 2 off. They told me the target had never served in regular military, so he'd be less disciplined. I remember snorting at that. Discipline doesn't come from paperwork. It comes from what a man's willing to do and what he's already done. I asked to see photographs, and not the overhead postcards. Real photos, faces, vehicles, close-up shots of the walls. That's where the truth hides. Little details at the edges. The liaison grimaced and slid me a thin stack like they were on rations. Fewer than I wanted. That told me right away they weren't serious about documentation. Don't give me a bunch of crap in writing, I told him. I want photographs. Photos don't lie the same way reports do. They can be staged, sure, but you can usually smell that. One photo bothered me. A small metal box bolted high on the inside of the wall near the side gate. No one had labeled it. No mention in the brief. I circled it with a pen and asked. Shrugs. Probably just a junction box, they said. I didn't like that word, probably. A junction box means power. Power means potential, lighting, alarms, cameras. Nobody had bothered to find out. That's when I knew I was walking into straight, goofy territory, half-lit nonsense. But a warrior is a guy that wishes to be involved. Period. That's my definition. You don't sit back and whine that the paperwork is bad. You go. You put your boots on the ground and you fix problems at the source. That's the only reason anybody ever heard of me. I kept showing up. I kept saying yes, even when the intel was bent, especially then. We stepped off once the town went mostly dark. Street lights flickering in some spots, dead in others. Their power grid came and went like a drunk relative. I wore what they wore. Loose local clothes over light gear. I had enough Arabic in my mouth to buy bread, curse at a taxi, ask for directions, and tell somebody to move. You go to a country you're going to work in, you need the language to stay alive, you're going to learn enough to get by. Survival will teach you faster than any classroom. The two guerrillas walked slightly ahead, casual, like they were just taking a walk. That phrase meant something to us. Taking a walk meant recon, meant work, meant watching. We moved like we had somewhere to be, but weren't late. Rush and you stand out. Stroll and you stand out. Move with purpose at a comfortable pace and you blend. Little decisions like that keep you breathing. On the last stretch, I broke off and jogged a loose loop around the outside of the neighborhood. Jogging is cover. Americans do stupid things. To most of those locals, jogging is stupid. So they see an older foreigner running laps at night and think, crazy old man, and they look away. Meanwhile, I'm counting alleyways, checking sight lines, marking where a truck can tuck into shadow. Constant movement. If you park yourself in one spot, they'll have your ass just from watching with a pair of old field glasses. I don't give them that luxury. By the time we got eyes on the compound, I had my own map in my head, my own timing, my own feel for the ground. No analyst in a cool room can give you that. You earn it step by step. That's real intel. That's what you trust when the folder in your pocket starts to smell like fiction. We settled behind a low mud wall across the wadi from the compound. Night had gone cool. Desert cool. That creeping cold that sneaks into your bones if you sit too long. I looked across at the compound and the first thing that jumped out at me was light. The brief said low light discipline. 1 lantern, maybe 2. Instead, I counted at least 6 sources. A flickering blue wash from some kind of television in one room. A hard white light over the front gate. Moving pinpricks in the courtyard, like flashlights or little lamps. That told me right away they were either expecting trouble or they just lived different from the picture we'd been sold. Either way, light discipline was nonsense. Second thing, dogs. We'd been promised 1 or 2, chained. You can tell a lot by how a dog sounds. These weren't chained to some front post. I heard at least 4, maybe 5, moving, circling, snapping at each other, barking from different corners, loose dogs. That turns your outer ring into a live alarm system that moves faster than any guard. If you haven't trained for them, you're just meat in the dark. Third thing, The communications antenna they'd drawn like some low-rent radio mast. Through the glass I saw more than one mast, different elements. Extra line running down the wall right into that same little metal box I'd circled in the photo. That wasn't just a junction. That was part of a system. Maybe cameras, maybe motion sensors, maybe kitchen table science that kicks on a light if someone steps wrong. Either way, nobody had written a single word about it. I've seen lazy briefings. I've seen people fudge numbers and shave details. But this one wasn't just thin. It was wrong about the basic character of the place. Compounds have personalities. This one felt tense, alert, like a man standing up on his toes instead of slumped in a chair. They'd sold it to us as a sleepy family place with a sloppy cousin hiding in the corner. What I saw was a hardened node. My locals muttered to each other, and one used a word that basically meant, "We're in the caca now." Deep trouble. He was right. We hadn't even crossed the water yet, and I already knew this wasn't the mission they'd described. That feeling in your chest when the ground and the paper don't match, you pay attention to that, ignore it, and you end up on a wall, carved in stone. I pulled him in closer and pointed things out. More lights than promised. More dogs. Cameras. More men moving than the neat little guard diagram. I didn't pretend maybe it's still fine. That's another rule. You don't cling to a comforting lie once reality slaps you. You adjust right away. I told him, from here on, we trust only what we see and hear. The folder is dead. We watched. Movement patterns. How long it took someone to cross from building to building. Who looked like muscle and who looked like family. The man they'd shown us as our main target had a particular look. Soft belly, bad knee, slight limp, sugar addict with his tea. I never saw anyone like that. Not once. Not in a doorway. Not crossing the yard. Not even a matching outline. So, in simple terms, here's what I knew. Dogs wrong, lights wrong, antennas wrong, guard count wrong, target presence unknown, family count off. Every pillar of their intelligence had cracks in it. On paper, we were walking into a light grab. On the ground, we were about to poke a hornet's nest. A warrior is the man who still steps forward in that moment. Not because he wants to die, because he wants to be where the real decisions are being made. You don't make real decisions about war from a chair. You make them outside a wall, with dogs barking and cameras sweeping the courtyard. I told him we'd go in soft, no big blast, no loud door charge. I still wanted a live capture if possible. Killing is easy, but what do you have once you kill somebody? You've got a dead body to get out. You've got blood and noise and questions. Capture is harder. Capture gives you answers. So we rewrote the plan right there in the dirt. We slid down into the wadi, following a darker strip where the last rains had cut a shallow channel. Sand underfoot is your friend. Softer, quieter, every step a decision. My breathing stayed slow and even. I'd done more nights like this than I could count by then, but you still feel that edge alive under your skin. If you stop feeling it, you're either dead already or you're about to be. Halfway across, the dogs picked us up. There's a tone change. They go from random noise to focused alarm. The brief riders had them chained and half asleep. Reality had them free and circling. I counted at least 3 different barks, one of them close to our intended entry point. We froze. Freezing is a skill. Everything in your body wants to move when danger gets close. But sometimes the best move is no move at all. We let the barking ramp up, then wobble. One of the locals whispered to them in Arabic, low and calm, like a man talking to animals he grew up with. It didn't shut them down, but it blunted the edge, turned sharp barks into confused noise. Good enough. We eased up the far bank, stuck to the darkest stretch of the wall. When I laid my hand on that mud brick, I felt stone and old wire underneath, reinforced spots. The overhead pictures had made it look like cheap, crumbly walls. Parts of this thing would eat your knife and your time if you tried to cut through. Harder wall means more noise if you don't pick your spot. We slid down to the part of the wall near that metal box from the photo. Up close, I could see the little glass eye underneath, half clogged with dust. That was some sort of sensor. Might just trip a light. Might start ringing a bell inside. Either way, that little box that nobody knew about could ruin our night in 1 second. One more thing they were wrong about. So we shifted again. Left, right, feeling the wall, listening to how it sounded when we tapped. You don't argue with a wall. You don't stand there complaining that the map says it should be weak here. You slide until you find the true weak spot. That's the whole game. We finally found a softer stretch. You can hear and feel the difference when you scratch at it. My local pulled out a short, ugly tool from his robe and started quietly chewing out a low hole near the base. Not some dramatic, man-sized doorway, a crawl hole. People love big entrances. They look good in movies. Crawl spaces are slower. They force you to think before you pass into the next space. I like that. While he worked, I tracked the roofline. That's when I spotted a boxy shape in the gloom. Little camera, sweeping a slow, lazy arc. Old gear, but gear all the same. Enough to catch motion. Enough to tell them something was wrong if we walked through the courtyard like tourists. Nothing in the packet about cameras. Nothing at all. I could have stopped and given you a lecture about why this happens. How chains of command talk themselves into believing. Rural means dumb. Family compound means no electronics. And lightly guarded means easy night. But in that moment, there's no time for philosophy. In the field, all the big talk boils down to 3 words. Adjust or die. One at a time, we slid through the crawl hole, belly down, elbows and knees come up slow. On the other side, inside the compound, the smell was different. Warm oil, sweat, diesel, and that metallic tang of gun oil and old powder. The brief had them as a few rifles and maybe one worn-out machine gun. My nose told me there were a lot more weapons than that sitting in those buildings. We came up between the outer wall and a small outbuilding, narrow strip, good cover. No one in sight yet, dogs still barking, but they hadn't pinned us. I crept to the corner and peeked. The yard was tighter than the drawings. More buildings, add-ons, lean-tos they'd built since that old overhead shot. The layout in the folder didn't exist anymore. We were operating off a map of a dead compound. When that happens, you stop treating the folder like scripture. You start making your own map in your head and, if you get the chance, on paper later. Write, record, listen, take photographs. That's not just my little saying. That's how you turn nights like this into useful lessons instead of pointless scars. We crossed the yard in short bursts, hugging shadows, using every crate and barrel as cover. Night movement is a rhythm. Move, stop, breathe, listen, move again. I counted more men with rifles than the briefers had promised. Not just 2 lazy guards and a bored tower man. At least 3 armed men strolling between doors, plus young boys carrying trays and buckets. More weapons, more eyes, more chances for someone to see a shadow that shouldn't be there. The main building, the one they said was our target's home, was lit and loud. Voices poured out. Laughter, not relaxed family laughter. Hard-edged talk. Men boasting about ugly work. That's not the sound of a fearful cousin hiding under someone's protection. That's the sound of men who think they own the night. Our supposed target was drawn as a soft man. Bad knee, sugar tea, slight limp, when a big-shouldered man stepped into the doorway with an AK, moving like he could run all the way to the border. I knew that description was useless. Maybe it had been true once. Now, not so much. Or maybe they'd clipped the wrong mugshot to the wrong file. Happens more than they'll admit. We worked our way toward a smaller building the intel called storage. Maybe some grain, maybe extra bedding. But as we got close, I heard the low hum. Generators. a fan. That building sounded alive, not like a shed, like a nerve center. So, again, the brief had it backwards. What they'd marked as nothing was everything. The door was unlocked. Unlocked at night on an important building is always suspicious. Could be laziness, could be bait. I eased it open a crack and listened. Fan, hum, no voices. Dogs still loud outside. I slid in. Inside that room was full of the real war. Radios, racks of patched together equipment, tape decks, stacks of cassettes, a table with notebooks piled like someone had been writing their life story in tiny letters. That room was the brain of the place, not some grain closet. And in the entire fat packet I'd been given, it had been dismissed in one lazy line. We moved fast. One man on the door, eyes on the yard. Two of us ripping the place apart with discipline. Tapes into sacks, notebooks sorted by date if we could manage it. You can replace a radio. You can't recreate a recorded voice you never captured. You can't recreate a handwritten ledger burned in a panic. Documentation is survival for them and for us. I already knew by then that our original high-value target was likely not where they swore he'd be. But that didn't mean the night was wasted. You shift the mission. You adapt. You don't cling to a single name. You look for what the ground is actually giving you. We were in the middle of loading gear when the first real complication stepped up. A young voice in the corridor. Nervous. Questioning. Feet approaching the door. That door wasn't fully closed. A spear of light hit the floor as he started pushing it open. Killing him would have been the easy answer. A quick move, blade into soft tissue, drag him inside, shut the door, add one more body to the tally. But unless you absolutely need a body, you're better off with a breath. A living man is information. A corpse is just weight. I waved my local guy forward. He slipped to the side of the door, hid his weapon, and put on the act. As the door cracked, he greeted the kid in Arabic like he belonged there, complained about the heat, asked if the tea was ready in the other wing. The boy peered in, saw shapes he didn't recognize, confusion starting to bloom in his eyes. We had about a heartbeat to decide if this was going loud or staying quiet. The local stepped in closer, hand on the boy's shoulder, pulling him half inside like two relatives talking. That's when I moved. One step, one smooth motion, steel pressing into that hollow under his ribs. Not stabbing, just a cold, sharp promise. His breath caught, he froze. That was our first capture of the night. We sat him down on the floor, bound his hands just enough, and whispered reality into his ear. Stay quiet, stay alive, make noise, and this night gets very short. You don't need to scream at people to get the point across. Fear travels just fine in a calm voice. He cracked, like they all do, gave us the real picture. According to him, our named target didn't live there anymore. Hadn't slept there in weeks. He floated between different safe spots. Too many eyes on this compound now. Too much risk. The man really running this place, right now, tonight, was somebody else entirely. Former regular Army. Disciplined, mean, and he was wide awake in that main building with the laughing men. So let's count it. Intel wrong about the target living there, wrong about which building mattered most, wrong about the guard strength, wrong about the dogs, wrong about the tech, wrong about who was actually worth grabbing. But inside that mountain of wrong, there was something right. That compound mattered. It was a real node. Fighters came through, money came through, orders came through. The man in charge tonight knew those flows better than some ghost of a cousin living nowhere near the place. That was the man I wanted now. We tied the kid to a rack, gave him just enough slack to breathe easy, but not enough to go anywhere clever. I don't enjoy hurting people for its own sake. Violence is a tool, not a pastime. But I am not shy about doing what's needed to keep my people alive and get what I came for. Here was a choice. We were deep inside a compound that didn't match the brochure. We'd already stolen tapes and notebooks. We had one scared kid and a picture of a network. We could have walked out right then, called it, and written up a polite target not present, intel outdated, partial success. Nobody would have called that cowardice. But that's not why I kept working long after most men my age were playing golf and complaining about aches. A warrior is the man who stays in the arena of decision. He doesn't hand the night back to someone in a swivel chair. He doesn't let a broken brief be the last word. We had Surprise working for us. They had numbers and home field, but they believed their own myth of safety. They thought of the place as theirs. They weren't expecting 3 men crawling through walls and rearranging their evening. Surprise is worth more than extra guns most nights. They had mass. We had initiative. That trade looked good to me. We decided to take the man in charge alive. To do that right, we needed him alone. You don't rush a room full of armed men if you can avoid it. Too many guns, too many angles, too many chances for things to go sideways. Professionals respect odds. Amateurs close their eyes and hope. We leaned on the kid again. Where did the boss go to smoke? To think? To take a leak? Every leader has a place he steps into alone, where he thinks nobody sees him. A corner? A side yard? A little balcony? That's where you touch him? The boy told us about a small side courtyard off the main hall. The man liked to go there late, stare at the sky, pretend to be alone. He'd already been there once that night. The kid guessed he'd go again before he slept. Habits. Men live or die on their habits. That was our window. We packed the most valuable tapes and notebooks. The rest we left. You learn to be brutal about weight. Every page you carry has a cost when you're running for your life. Part of documentation is knowing what not to take. Sometimes a quick photograph of a page is better than shoving the whole book into a sack. We slipped back into the yard, hugging our blind spots. The camera on the roof kept turning. Slow, lazy arc. We'd timed it earlier, counted the seconds. You wait, then move in that thin sliver of time where the lens looks away. Country might be poor, but their electronics still obey physics. We pressed against the wall of the main building. Inside, men shouted at each other over cards or some terrible show on television. Noise is their comfort. It's also my cover. A loud room full of men is one of the safest places to be sneaking nearby, as long as you don't step where the floor creaks. The door to that side courtyard was just ahead. My mind snapped into that cold, steady place. You feel the world slow down when you're about to roll the dice. That isn't magic. That's experience. You've done enough of these, your body knows how much attention this next minute needs. Plan was simple. 1 man each side of the courtyard door. I'd stand just inside the dark. When our man stepped out, all relaxed and alone, he'd take 1 step too far. Hand over his mouth, steel in his back, a little walk to the comms room, everything quiet. Nobody the wiser until long after we were gone. This is where capture beats kill again. Shooting him out there in the open might have been easier in the very short term. 1 crack, 1 body, loud mess, but then what? Whole compound wakes up. You fight your way out or you die in the yard. A dead man gives you nothing but trouble. A live man, if you handle him right, gives you an entire campaign. So we waited. You want to know how long? Felt like it stretched all the way back to Korea and forward to Afghanistan. In reality, it was a few minutes. That's the thing about waiting in the dark with your hand on a knife and your mind replaying all the things that can go wrong. Time balloons. When the door finally opened, he stepped out alone. That was our first blessing. No smoking buddy, no extra set of eyes, just him. His silhouette filled the doorway, then he walked out into the courtyard, shut the door behind him. That was our second blessing. Men think closing a door makes them safe. In my world, it just cuts off witnesses. He stood there, looking up at the sky like it owed him something. I stepped out of the shadow, 1 smooth move. Hand clamped over his mouth, steel pressing into that spot just above the kidney. Whisper in his ear in rough Arabic, telling him to keep quiet if he wanted to see sunrise. He understood. They always do in that moment. We turned him, walked him backward into the dark, then moved him through the yard in a loose huddle, like three men going nowhere special, back into the comms building, back into our little world of racks and tapes and one terrified kid. 2 captures now, both breathing, both very aware that their night had changed. That's how you turn a mission built on lies into something that matters. You take control. You pull real people out of the fantasy and make them talk. Once we had him tied to the chair, we didn't waste time. No theatrics, no screaming, just calm questions in his language and mine. Who are you? Who do you report to? Who comes through this place? Where do they go? Which routes are safe? Which officials are bought? We used their own bad intel like bait, throwing out wrong names and wrong schedules so he'd correct us. Every time he said, no, that's not how it is, we learned something. While my locals worked his mind, I worked the room. Pocket camera out, click, gear, labels, notebook covers, his face, the kid's face, the layout. Don't tell me in a page of flowery writing that the place was lightly equipped. Show me the photograph of 3 racks of radios and a pile of tapes, and now anyone who sees it knows what kind of node this really was. He held out longer than a lot of men I've met. He had real discipline. That's what I'd been told he didn't have. Wrong again. But eventually the math caught up with him. He saw the tapes we'd taken, recognized handwriting on the notebooks, understood that the quiet old foreigner in front of him knew enough to hurt him and his network badly without firing another shot. He started talking for real. We learned that fighters passed through that compound on their way to other fronts, that safe houses in different towns fed them in, that money ran one way, weapons another way, orders through yet another path. We got names, little local bosses, outside facilitators, corrupt police, honest ones who were in danger, signals you can't get from a corpse. And while all this was happening, the rest of the compound went on with its night. Men laughed at bad jokes, dogs paced and lay down again. Somewhere a man cursed about empty cigarette packs. Nobody knew the brain of their little world was being dissected in a hot side room. I kept an eye on the clock in my head. That 5-hour night window doesn't last forever. Sooner or later, first light starts nibbling at the horizon. Farmers wake, bakers fire ovens. First prayers come, the dark stops being concealment and turns into a backdrop. You don't want to still be sliding through alleys when that happens. So we squeezed what we could from him in the time we had. We photographed key pages instead of hauling every book. We took the most important tapes and left the rest. You learn to be ruthless. Documentation is useless if it gets you killed before you can hand it over. When we were done asking questions, I leaned in and told him something simple. I told him his real problem wasn't me. His real problem was the myth of safety he'd been sold. All that equipment, all those walls, all those guards and dogs and cameras, and still one old foreigner and 2 locals had walked in, taken his toys, and were about to walk out with him under a blanket. That's what safety really looks like in these places. Paper thin. We gagged him lightly, bound his legs, and got ready to move. You never want to carry more weight than you have to, even if that weight talks and screams. Put him on his feet, steady him, and walk him. He stays upright, maybe he gets to see another sunrise. That's the deal. We retraced our path through the yard. Time with the camera. Sweeps again. Slip back into the crawl hole. Drop into the wadi. I took my little mirror out when we had some cover. Flashed the pattern up toward the sky. 2 short, 1 long. A few moments later, way up there, engines rumbled a little louder, shifting position. Primitive communication, but it worked before satellites, and it'll work after them. Walking back through that town felt longer than the approach. It always does on the way out. Every doorway feels like an ambush. Every noise like a shout. But the truth is, most civilians are too busy with their own lives to notice ghosts slipping past. A couple of late drunks argued. A stray dog trotted across a lane. Nobody looked close enough to see the outline of a bound man under a dusty blanket in the back of a beat-up vehicle. At the safe point, just before the world really started waking up, I laid it all out. Tapes, notebook pages, photographs, my notes, our prisoner. The liaison looked like he'd swallowed a stone. They'd sent us after a ghost and we'd brought them the central nervous system instead. I told them straight. Their intelligence had been wrong on every important point. Dogs, guards, cameras, layout, leadership, target presence, all of it. The only reason we weren't bleeding out in that yard was because we stopped believing their paper and started believing our eyes. Some of them heard me. The ones who truly understood that intelligence is a living thing, not a static product. They leaned in, asked questions, took notes. Others, the fragile ones, started mumbling about field improvisation like it was a sin. Shitbirds like that will always exist. Men who'd rather you die matching their picture than live by changing it. But the truth was, sitting right there in front of them, tied to a chair and breathing hard. You asked me about a compound assault where intelligence was wrong about everything. That was it. Not a movie script, not a clean, glorious raid. Just one long night in the 80s where reality tore the folder to shreds and we either adapted or died. Here's what matters. You can't control the quality of what lands on your desk. Some nights you'll get good, current pictures and solid sources. Some nights you'll get a thick folder full of guesses, dressed up like facts. That's life. What you control is your reaction when the ground doesn't match the ink. A warrior is a guy who wishes to be involved. That means he walks into that gap between the story and the truth. He doesn't freeze. He doesn't stand in the wadi whispering, but the brief said, while dogs close in. He says, all right, that's wrong. What's true now? And he moves on that. Volunteer for everything. If I'd turned that mission down because the intel smelled off, somebody else would have taken it. Maybe they'd have trusted the front gate plan. Maybe they'd have walked through under the light expecting 2 sleepy guards and found 6 awake ones with dogs and cameras. That's how small lies turn into dead men. Documentation is survival. Not just for history books, for the next man. We took photographs of gear and layouts and faces. We grabbed tapes and notebooks. Years later, when some office type tried to rewrite the story, those photos were the end of the argument. Don't bring me a polished report and no images. Bring me proof. Capture beats kill when you can manage it. Killing is easy. It's also wasteful if you do it out of habit. That compound leader we walked out under a blanket opened doors that 100 dead fighters never could. Routes, names, patterns, strategic shifts. You don't get that from a body bag. And never forget the night. Move when they sleep. Use their habits against them. They don't like to work in the dark. You do. That 5-hour window is where you earn your pay. That's where you find out who you really are. So picture it one last time. A compound in the 80s, dogs louder than they were supposed to be, cameras nobody mentioned, walls stronger than the drawings, the wrong man in charge, sitting in the right chair, and 3 shadows slipping in, rewriting the mission on the fly, walking out with tapes, photographs, and a very important man who woke up that day sure he was safe. That's how you survive when intelligence is wrong about everything. You stop treating the folder like a Bible. You become the intel yourself.